Good evening, Chief.
Hi, Chief.
I'm good. Got the silent.
Sorry about that.
No, that's all right.
Just focused on switching
The
gears.
transition, yeah. So overall, our 2025 budget is, like I think the previous discussions, mostly focused on personnel. The other categories and areas of it are intended to help improve officer confidence and well-being, and making their jobs more functional and efficient. So as I go through, that's kind of the underlying theme. It's a headcount neutral budget. We're not looking to add any positions that weren't in our 24 budget. So I'm going to explain a couple things along the way here to help understand some of the significant increases. So obviously the first one is my salary set by the white collar cost of living contract 2% increase for 24 to 25. Other components of that are longevity and education incentive that reflect that a little bit. For the officer salaries, it's a little misleading with the jump from 24 to 25. When we went into 2024, it was the beginning of a contract year for the 1,000 Club. So that contract wasn't settled during the 24 budget process. So the number you see for 2024 is essentially the 2023 number plus the contractual and step increases that occurred that year. It did not have any cost of living adjustment that was, because that wasn't decided until later into the year after the budget was already in place. So the 2024 number, you actually would add 3% to that number under the officer-based salaries, which would bring that number up to approximately $3,412,000. And then in 2025, there's a contractual 4% increase. So that's where you get the additional amount of approximately $135,000. And then also contractual are step increases for officers' time on the job and longevity for years of service. So the step increases account for about $45,000 of that number, and longevity is about $9,000. So that's where we get to the $3,629,000 change number. So it's 2023 budget plus 3%, then plus 4%, plus contractual steps, plus longevity increases. So that's where that dollar amount comes from. So that covers 34 sworn personnel, from the captain down to the recruits. The salary compensation for retirements, we are budgeting that as we did in 2024. That's not a line that gets used every year. The way the contract works is upon completion of service for retirement purposes only. There's buyout of sick time and a couple other banks like vacation, comp time, things like that. So typically we budget for an expected number to leave during that contractual time period or the budget time frame. In 2025, we'll have 2 personnel that are eligible to leave. What we've seen in law enforcement recently is very few people stay beyond the 20-year mark. Some stay a couple of years beyond that, but we typically see people leave closer to 20 than we had in previous years. So we expect to at least use a portion of that, if not all of it. Holiday pay, again, another contractual benefit. So because police officers can't take the day off on town holidays, like for other town members, they're obligated to go for public safety reasons. They're compensated in different ways. So they can either take that holiday pay that the other town employees get and get straight pay during the pay period, or they have the ability to reflect that over to comp time that they can then take time off the road when staffing allows. So the holiday pay, we budget at $40,000, and then it'll come in somewhere around the number or below, depending on each calendar year how the officers elect to receive that compensation. So it's not a direct payout, because sometimes it benefits the taxpayer for the officers to be able to use that time for time off as opposed to getting direct paid compensation. Police overtime, we've increased for the 25 budget. We've seen significant use of the overtime. Obviously, we have an obligation to cover our public safety responsibilities on the road. We have a kind of fixed head count, obviously, because of the long-term expense of employees and how it's a significant portion of our budget already. So when we have unexpected absences, or absences that reduce coverage on the road, we're still obligated to have that staffing. So we've seen an increase in our expenses when it comes to overtime. So we're trying to budget that appropriately based on expectations. We try to separate out a couple different types of overtime. So there's a couple lines here related to overtime. The police overtime line, the large number, is for general purposes, and then there's a couple specific uses that we have broken out. For DWI and traffic safety, we get reimbursed that overtime as part of county and state grants. So we account for that out of a separate line in order to maintain accuracy there. I'm going to skip the bio for a second and go to reimbursable compensation. That is also an overtime line. That's if a private party requests police presence and we're going to staff with overtime, we then bill them. Examples of that would be like the turkey trot, other events where the special police in the past may have a supplemented staffing without tax dollars. We charge that cost back to the private entity in order to recoup that. So we track that separately. And then skipping down a little further to the overtime school resource officers, again, that's reimbursed by the school district. That's overtime that is directly related to school events that we bill to them based on what they're asking of our officers to do, so that it's not reflected out of our tax dollars, it's reimbursed to the school district. So going back to clerical salaries, those were the overtime lines that are kind of spread out. We have 4 currently staffed full-time clerical positions. We have an authorized position from 2024 for an additional clerk that we haven't filled yet. We're in the process of working through that job duties and descriptions right now, and we'll have that position in place prior to the start of 25 budget. So that dollar amount reflects 5 full-time clerical staff. So that would be 4 clerks and our property clerk / quartermaster. Clerical overtime is very rare, but we have at least a small amount of money allotted to that in case it happens. And our part-time employee wages, that is our fleet vehicle assistant. Basically, with the amount of vehicles that we have, I think we're 25 total vehicles in the department. There's a lot of maintenance that has to happen to those vehicles, from tire changes, oil changes, mechanic issues. We utilize this person to shuttle vehicles back and forth. I know we had a discussion a couple months ago, now I think it was, about our contract for vehicle maintenance. He doesn't do the shuttling back and forth to Avon. That's done by that vendor. This is for like the trips in town to like Goodyear, oil changes, car washes, those kinds of things. So he helps keep the fleet running at a very effective cost. School crossing guards, again, that's a function that has kind of a limited application. There's one crossing point on Clem Road in front of Clem North and Clem South to help the students that live in the neighborhoods across the street cross Clem Road safely. So it's staffed and funded by the police department. And if we don't have a part-timer, then on-duty road patrol will go down and assist with covering that for child safety. So again, that's been a pretty steady cost across the years. Tobacco compliance, again, that's grant reimbursed if we utilize that. I reduced it because we do a lot of on-duty staffing. That hasn't really had a lot of overtime impact on that, but it'll be reimbursed through the county program. Computer equipment and licensing, there's been a lot of conversation about that. Obviously, we moved that to the cost center to the departments a couple of years ago. So for us, we have a number of computers to deal with. We have 26 fixed computers in the department. Some of them are communal computers for the officers to use. They're not assigned each individual one. And then we have we've started our transition to kind of a mobile work environment. So as much as we can, we've started to change our administrative and investigative staff over to mobile work platforms so that they can be functional in other areas than just our offices. Obviously, that ties into the IT task force we're talking about as far as automation and the infrastructure of our network and how to make that more efficient. But we've started that process already. So between the 26 fixed stations and the 7 mobile computers that we have to keep a rotation going for replacing those in an effective manner with the updates that are happening through the software services. So that's where that dollar amount comes from. It's a combination of user licenses, which will be about $20,000, about $13,500 for new computers, and additional $2,500 for equipment to support those computers. Next, we get into our capital purchasing section. So for office, we've been working over the last couple of years to update the facility with some of the equipment. Some of the equipment that is currently still in service as far as furniture goes for the patrol officers is from the 1998 renovation that happened. So we're over that kind of 25-year shelf life of some of the equipment that the officers are performing with. Some of it was more recent, but it gets beat up over the years. So we're going to continue to improve their work environment with some new equipment, desks and chairs. And then we're also retrofitting one of the old storage areas or office areas for a training environment to help with some of the in-service training requirements we have for officers. So we're working with both of those out of that capital office line. So for miscellaneous, when you became aware of the sewer renovation project and what they're doing down there, for those who don't know, we have a range, firearms range that's located at the sewer plant. As the project has progressed there, we've kind of transitioned that range to be a little bit more functional. So it required moving it to accommodate one of the clarifiers that went in. So when that happened, we started to slowly over the years kind of improve the conditions down there. We have a little shed down there, we have a barrier wall to protect the clarifiers and all of the sewer operation. We now have the ability, or the opportunity, I guess that would be the right word, is to tie electrical into the building we have down there as part of the sewer project that's happening, or the next phase of the sewer project. So we originally were going to tend to use drug acid seizure money for that expense when we went through the approval process this year to implement it. As it happens, this year for 2025, they've changed the rules on drug acid seizure and what it can be used for, and that project will no longer qualify for that expense. So we've moved that expense into this budget line here, capital purchase miscellaneous, in order to install electrical to the range building down there. For firearms, in 24 we had a increase. Like I said, we've been working to improve our officers' capabilities. One of the new technology things that has been proven to have a difference in life and death confrontations is the red dot optics that are now functional on pistols. So a number of years ago, we installed them on all our rifles because that was the platform that they initially were designed for. But now, through technology, they're rugged and very effective on duty pistols. So this year, we're in the selection process, and we're going to implement the red dot optics. So in 25, we've reduced that capital expense back down to our regular kind of program for purchasing other equipment like the long rifles. So tying to the officer confidence and defensibility, we've done individual issue of patrol rifles for officer confidence in deploying those weapons. And we're going to continue to purchase and outfit keep more rifles in 2025 in order to complete that project. For technical services, capital purchase, we're going to purchase and implement a second speed trailer. I think everybody on the board's aware of the number of speed complaints we get, and it's probably the #1 consistent issue that we want to address with our community to help keep them safe. We have a current speed trailer that we worked with our communications director on to get some online requests and reporting set up on, and we've been inundated with requests to have the speed trailer deployed to help educate people and reduce speeds in neighborhoods. So we're going to outfit a second trailer, because obviously the functional window for us in the town of Webster, weather-wise, for getting trailers out and not having them implement or impede the snow removal process is fairly limited, so we want to try to maximize as much as we can during good weather. So we're going to implement a second trailer for that. For, let's see where we're next, the vehicle accessories. So, like I mentioned before, we have 25 total vehicles. We have 13 patrol, 6 unmarked, 6 special purpose vehicles. So we have a fairly consistent rotation of 3 vehicles a year in order to keep that fleet operational. This year we're going to do 2 marked, 1 unmarked. So the vehicle setup ties directly to that. Unmarked don't require as much vehicle accessories as the patrol units do, and the vehicles don't cost as much. So the next 2 lines are both reduced to reflect the needs. So that is, yeah, so for 2 marked, 1 unmarked vehicle and the setup that goes along with it. So it depends on what we're able to purchase on bid as far as the equipment, as to what transfers one vehicle to the other. Sometimes not all of the equipment is compatible with the new make and model that we're able to acquire. So vehicle purchasing for police fleets has been very tumultuous over the last couple of years. A couple of the major manufacturers have either slowed or stopped making patrol-ready vehicles. So we have a mix of Ford and Dodge vehicles that we've been putting into service. Our unmarks this year will probably start to transition to another manufacturer as well, because they're not as available. Capital purchase DWI equipment, that typically goes towards radar units and roadside screening devices, things like that. So that'll continue to keep that functional. Professional development is for conferences and associations for the chief in order to keep current with information. Our court, I lost track where it was, the court costs for retired officers. We haven't really seen a significant impact on that, but there are times where officers who have retired are required to report and testify in cases that occurred during their employment, and we are required to compensate them for that. So there hasn't been a huge use of that, but it's available if necessary. With our cellular telephones, a couple of, I think it was in the 24 budget cycle, if I remember correctly, we saw a significant increase in the telephone system within the town hall. Prior to that, all our patrol officers had voicemail systems that were part of that network. That was usually, or used to be at a reduced rate. The provider of that service stopped doing the reduced rate and the whole account for each officer, which they wouldn't utilize the other functions of it. So we took advantage of that concept and some of the other impacts we've seen with police communications and transition to individual device issue for the officers for cellular telephones. So we moved to the FirstNet platform to ensure communications, and prior to implementation, officers were using their personal phones frequently related to job duties. And if that communication contained any evidentiary value, it subjected their personal devices potentially to discovery and things like that, as that court realm kind of progressed and evolved with communication. So we tried to get ahead of that. We've issued new devices, and that's worked out very effectively. So the increase in the line item is reflective of that. Office expense. So that a lot of report forms, a lot of things we use are now electronic. So as a county, we went away from handwritten police reports. We have a mobile electronic reporting system. So that is mostly paperless. We have some forms, though, that aren't included within that county network that do require individual form purchase. Other than that, it also includes things like the destruction barrels and things for drug collection and destruction, things like that. Lease and rental, that's for copiers. So that is pretty consistent based on the contract price of the monthly maintenance. The next line item, service contracts. That's like the evolution of everything else we've seen. Software as a service. It's where we utilize a lot of our software programs to either conduct investigations or facilitate investigations. So some of those line items are related to investigative options the officers have to look up information. Some of them are related to plate readers and the automated systems on the cars. Provision is included in there. That's our body camera vendor. So the annual subscription for that and storage of data. Traffic logic, which is the speed signs that we can put out or that are out in fixed locations that transmit speed collection data through a software program. Lexipol, our new policy manual that's in the process of being implemented. That takes us away from the old handwritten general orders and self-maintained to a service that maintains and updates those as the laws evolve and provides policy guidance that you can accept and implement, along with a couple others. So that's it's kind of the catch-all for all the different software as a service systems that we use to facilitate the police department. Shipping expense, that's a kind of nominal number there that sometimes is related to investigations, sometimes is related to testing of equipment and returning it, things like that. Telephone expense, again, we transitioned away from the officers having accounts within that system on mobile devices, so we've reduced that line item to reflect that. Computer expense, so that was a line that was budgeted previously, but it really isn't utilized. The stuff that was captured in that prior to can be associated with different line items, so I've zeroed that out in order to make it more functional. Community service, again, we don't have a community service unit dedicated to that function. We used to, but our officers still perform that function on duty in conjunction with everything else they do. So we still buy equipment for tables at community events, stickers and things for tours and kids to pass out to. Firearm expense, that's non-capital purchase stuff. That's the targets, the ammunition, things that get expended within the budget year. The prices on that have fluctuated, but we're pretty consistent over the last couple of years with what we're spending on that. Investigative expense has seen an increase. Part of that is DNA testing and some of the other investigations that we're involved in that require a third-party lab service in order to test some of the evidence. So we've seen an increase in utilizing some of those things to facilitate some of the larger investigations. Technical service expenses, those are things that, again, through the budget year get used up from the technical aspect of law enforcement, processing crime scenes and things like that, and the equipment that goes along with it. Miscellaneous equipment typically covers things like AED batteries, AED units, the taser cartridges, things. We had an increased expense in '24. We've reduced that back down to expected expenditure in '25, which was more consistent with what it was in '23. Vehicle repair. So the vehicle repair line is a little misleading. A lot of our major vehicle repairs are usually in conjunction with a fleet vehicle accident, and a lot of times that's money that's recovered through the insurance process. So
which is recorded as revenue.
Yeah, so that'll show in the revenue. It's hard to project that though as to what the payouts are going to be from insurance companies and whether it's going to be completely covered. So vehicle repairs typically are minimal for the maintenance of the vehicles. Sometimes there's transmission issues or brake issues or whatever, but the larger expenses are usually related to a fleet vehicle accident. Vehicle tires, so we do winter tires, summer tires. We're pretty efficient with that. We cut down the expense a couple of years ago by going to a service that comes out twice a year to do the changeover for us. It greatly reduced both our time and expenses related to the tire changeover. So now most of that is just the replacing tires as they become worn out through use. Vehicle gasoline, we've seen somewhat of a decrease. We budgeted kind of reflective of where the cost of fuel was over the last couple of years. We're able to reduce our projection down a little bit for 2025, so we've cut out some of the expense there. Vehicle oil, again, it's a pretty consistent because of the amount of service time our vehicles have. Essentially with our patrol vehicles, they run their entire shift. The way electronics and computer systems are integrated into the vehicle system now, it's not like the old days where the car would turn off and the computer would stay on. There is a number of systems running in there that the car has to stay running. So the idle time on the cars is fairly high. So we have a frequent maintenance schedule on oil changeover in order to keep the vehicles from having a negative impact as a result of that. Clothing expense, we've seen somewhat of an increase with that over the last couple of years. So that's pretty consistent with the cost of replacing uniforms, and 2 years, over the last 2 years we've changed our vendors and style uniforms, but essentially a main portion of that expense is the replacement of the ballistic vests. They're on a 5-year rotation for each officer. So as officers get hired, and then every 5 years we have to replace that based on manufacturer recommendation. So that is probably the largest component of that. EAP it's not a new line, but it's a new expense in my opinion. So in the past we've relied on third-party vendors for EAP services, and I think over the last few years in public safety in general, but law enforcement specifically, we've seen more of a focus on employee wellness and officer wellness. We have an opportunity to join a program that the Sheriff's Department is actually running, where it is a cost based on head count where we can participate in that program. So that's what I'm proposing for 2025. Essentially what it does, it gives us access to, I think it's 4 or 5 EAP professionals that can help officers deal with stress, deal with issues that they're being confronted with, or also offer wellness events in order to alleviate anything from getting to a catastrophic point. So that's probably the only new item in the budget that's different concept than what we've done in the past. Everything else is kind of maintenance of the programs that we've had. Physical expense, again, it depends on the hiring process. If we take transfers, we bear the cost of all of the onboarding and testing. If it's a recruit through the academy, hired through that process, Monroe County bears the cost of that. So there's some fluctuation in that line depending on where we're hiring from at the time. So the last 3 hires have all been recruits through the academy, so we haven't had to spend a lot on the hiring process or the onboarding process. Training is a continual focus of law enforcement. Supervision and training are the 2 key components that an organization has to maintain in order to be defensible through any kind of civil litigation. So that's a pretty consistent and robust process we have each year. We utilize as much as we can in-house. HR has been great getting us to improve our access to online training through like the PERMA portal and things like that. We assigned probably more training than the officers and process in 24 through that PERMA thing, but it's been some very interesting topics, and it brings a different perspective to, I think, some of the officers' thought process. So that's what that is for. And miscellaneous expenses and supplies have been kind of consistent through the years. Some of those things involve awards, miscellaneous items for the department, and there isn't really one big expense out of there to point to say that that's really what that's for. And then the uniform cleaning is contractual. That is between the 1,000 Club and the town. That outlines that the town will supplement him $600 annually for the dry cleaning services that the officers utilize. So that brings our expenses, again, and so it looks like a $340,000 increase from 24 to 25. It's not, it is on paper, but it's not the whole story. Like I said, the 3% on top of the 23 salaries is approximately 100,000 of that increase. And then the 4% increase in our largest service line, I think makes up the bulk of the rest of that. So jumping into, do you want to talk about expenses first, or do you want to go right to revenues?
I just have a comment or maybe a question on being the school resource officer.
Yeah.
Pardon? The revenues are minimal except for the school resource officer.
Right. Yeah, why did that one go down?
So in 24, we had, for most of the year, 1 officer assigned in 24. The revenue that comes from that depends on which officers are assigned and their seniority level, what their pay is. So there's an agreement between the school district and town that they pay 75% of the total expense of the officer. So it depends on who's assigned there as to what projected revenue is.
So it can vary.
Yeah. What was your question?
So, on police overtime, we're spending a lot of money, and instead of decreasing the amount of money we're spending in overtime, we're planning to increase the amount of money we're spending. So I guess my question would be, going down the road 2-3 years, do you envision that number continuing to go up, or are you working with headcount or some manner to bring that number down?
So we're always working to bring it down. I mean, that is a functional goal of the organization, is to manage overtime. Outside of our personnel expenses, that is our largest expense.
Right.
So do I see it continuing to increase? Not necessarily, no. I think that 2024 has shown us some of the challenges that we face in law enforcement these days. So during 2024 and into, so from 23 into 24, we had a number of officers that were on the books but out of work. So our actual operational headcount on the road was down between 5 and 6 people.
Right.
And so in the 23 budget, most of the increased overtime was covered by non-expenditure of the personnel line. So there's hiring challenges, so sometimes we don't fully expend in the personnel line. So if you don't have that headcount, you're going to have an increase in overtime to cover it. Not that we want to do it that way, but it actually is, if there's the right balance of it, it's a better fiscal option to pay overtime than it is to have headcount per se. Headcount gives you one additional person on one shift. Overtime is somewhat flexible if it's spread out and controlled in order to not pay a full salary and benefits. That only gives you essentially an 8-hour impact in a 24-hour day. So not saying that we're trying to maintain overtime, we're trying to reduce it every step of the way. The challenges are that sometimes we have long-term injuries, so we had an officer out for a little over a year that was injured making an arrest. During some of our disciplinary processes, we have officers who are being paid but not able to work the road. So we have to pay overtime to fill those positions. Sometimes that's expensive. So to cover a shift for a sergeant for 8 hours, it's $700 a day in overtime. So that's where we can't staff extra sergeants, but we have an obligation to have a supervisor on the road at all times. So those are some of the discussions we have behind the scenes in order to try to minimize the impact of that. But sometimes there's, I guess there's a couple of categories that are built into that overtime. One is critical events that require officers to stay beyond their shift that aren't directly related to staffing. It's more related to operations. There's times where it's for the expected vacancies, like vacation time, training time. When we take an officer off the road to go to school for a week, we don't have additional people, especially at the supervisory level, in order to backfill those without overtime expense. And then the third one is kind of unexpected vacancies where we have either an off-duty injury where officers can't work the road, because that's one of the challenges that we face that not every department faces, that if somebody sprains their ankle, they're going to be using sick time for a longer period of time in law enforcement than they would in maybe some other positions because they can't get fully cleared for duty. So I think, hopefully to answer your question in a summary here, yes, we try to control it. 2, I don't think it's going to continue to climb the way we've seen it. I think we were perhaps lucky for a couple of years with the COVID era where there wasn't a lot of police training and there wasn't a lot of additional operational requirements on the organization. I think we're coming out of that, or fully out of that, where we experience more similar to pre-COVID eras of overtime requirements for law enforcement.
Do you have the head count that you need right now, though, as far as operating officers?
So we are fully staffed headcount wise, and that's actually one of the current budget challenges that we have. So we have 35 headcount, but we only have 30 operational. Between, and again, for law enforcement, the training cycle is long. So we have 2 in the academy, we have 1 field training. The 2 in the academy won't be out on the road for an additional 6 months. So we're expending on the personnel line to staff to pay their position, but we're paying overtime for vacancies on the road on top of that. So it's a little bit different than 23. 24 is a little bit of a heavier lift and a bigger burden based on some of the other challenges.
Thank you, Chief. Appreciate it.
So just to cover the revenues, probably like the finance director said, the school district's the biggest one. We have an agreement that they cover 75% of the total cost, not just salary, but the benefits as well. And then they essentially get 75% of the use of the officer by having them in the school during the school year. In the summer, both officers set agreements for 2 positions. The officers come back to the road and work as traffic detail cars or supplement road staffing, and the same thing on holiday breaks and weekends during the year. Some of the other revenues there are grant reimbursements, expected reimbursement of overtime for the private events. We have fingerprinting revenue from people that come in for like passports, fingerprint, or job applications and licensing and things like that. And the one that's probably the most unknown is police unclassified. We do try to utilize some of the services that are out there to get rid of surplus equipment in order to get revenue from that. And so we see a little bit of that. That's in there. I'm going to jump to animal control. I'll talk fast. Animal control is a more effective. So we don't have a full-time animal control position. We utilize that service through part-time positions. So we have a lead animal control officer that is controlling or kind of running the organization and coordinating the other part-timers. A couple basic expenses that are attributed to their operation. Obviously the computer licensing, equipment through either new technology or replacing some of the worn out equipment. We're looking to transfer, or not even transfer, allocate some of these expenses correctly. In '24, some of these expenses were directly tied to the police budget. Since there already is an existing animal control budget, we're going to try to have those more accounted for in their system. The big thing that we've seen kind of increase in is the employee vaccinations. With a part-time staff that sometimes has turnover, getting the proper vaccinations can be expensive. The animal control seminar has an expense of $1,500, but it actually has a projected revenue higher than that. So that's, in summary, the animal control. If you have any specific questions.
Don't you worry, Paul. We'll get back on track in time, okay?
I brought a lot of words tonight, sorry.
No, but I mean, you know, in hindsight, when you set up the schedule, 15-minute slot for a department that is large in the budget, that's not practical.
All department reports are not reported. Yes, true.
Yeah, well, I mean,
But triple
you're
that.
correct. I
Equal
don't want to,
importance,
you know,
but
I
not
hope you
in
don't
length.
take that the wrong way.
No,
The
they're
smaller
equally important, but there's more detail to some.
Thank you. But does anybody else have any questions?
I just have one question about the speed trailer,
Yes.
because they're fairly expensive, and one of the things we talked about that came up with the ARPA funds, and I asked about were those smaller signs.
Yeah.
What is the benefit of a trailer versus those smaller signs that can be placed in more places throughout the town?
Typically data collection. So a lot of the smaller signs that you see don't actually collect and transmit data. They're there for an awareness to reflect to that person at that moment what their speed is. And they have a great benefit. Those signs that we use actually have cellular cards in them and send the data back to the network, the software as a service. So from our fixed locations in our trailer, they go a little bit beyond just the awareness level. They help us with targeted enforcement. So the expense I would try to divide out as to whether that location was intended to be awareness or whether it was intended to help assist with enforcement. So the benefit of the trailer is that it allows us to rotate it every week to different locations and collect more data than we would be able to afford data collection signs that are out there.
Can you respond
Thanks.
about enforcement? Like, is it taking a picture of a license plate, and then if they're going over a certain speed, you're going to issue tickets?
No, it's more the helps us know when to schedule a detail and when to put physical personnel out there to take enforcement action. So a lot of, I mean, it's very valid. A lot of people have concerns about speed in their neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Sometimes we find that that's a lack of education to either the driver or the observer as to what the actual speed of the vehicle is. People aren't trained in speed estimation, so
Right.
sometimes the benefit of the sign is that one, slow people down and make the driver aware. Because again, when it comes to vehicle safety, it's voluntary compliance. I mean, the person operating the vehicle has to voluntarily comply with whatever the rules are in order to ensure safety. The goal of enforcement is to have them voluntarily comply after the enforcement action. So the general complaints from people that there's cars speeding in my neighborhood don't help us designate when we're going to actually pay an officer to go sit out there and try to fix.
No, I think that's a great idea. And to Jennifer's point, I know that in Spencerport, as you enter into the village, they have a sign with a light, and it tells you how fast you're going. And you get a mad face if you're going over 30.
Yeah.
And you get a thank you if you're under 30. But this is not what we're talking about. You're talking about a mobile trailer that'll tell you exactly how fast you're going, and also will feed back information so that you will ultimately, if necessary, set up an officer with a speed gun, right?
Yeah, and there's a couple ways to deal with that. So sometimes it's when we get the data and we look at it, is that there's maybe some specific violators at very specific times. And then when you go back to the people who have called in the complaints or look at it, we say, okay, from this time to this time, which vehicle is that? And it ends up being most times somebody in their neighborhood that
Right.
is the violator. But it allows us to then get down to a specific issue to deal with instead of trying to generally enforce it.
Thank you very much.
That was helpful.
Just to put a ribbon on that, and Jen, I think you prefaced the question by saying that there's some ARPA money potentially set aside for this. 5 months to the day, because we're at August 1st, we will have to all commit under whatever we're in contract. We got about $750,000 or something like
Needs to
that.
be obligated by the end of this
Yeah,
year.
your April 30th report, I think we split it up in 5 or 6 projects at about 125, 150 per project. And one of them we earmarked was these speed signs. Now, Chief, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong on this, or Kat, you got the data collection ones, like the mobile ones that you can hook on the trailer and go around. You have data collection ones that we can hook up to the speed sign, and it'll collect data. If that's the way we go, those are exponentially more expensive because of the technology and this and that. That's really more of a police department thing. If the town board decides that we're going with ones that are just picking up solar or whatever, just telling you what your speed is as you go by it, that's going to be the highway department. They'll go and put them onto the signs. They do not collect data. They just tell you that you're going 37 miles per hour, and it's attached to a speed limit sign that says 30.
Mhm.
Is that pretty accurate?
That would be my advice, yes.
Okay.
Well, I asked if it was accurate. Those are the two different.
Yes, those are the two different ones. Those are
And, you know, we can have all the bells and the whistles in the world, but, you know, the ARPA money will pay for the unit, but then there would be operational costs going on, and if cell phone 5G changes. So there's analysis that has to be done in that, and we have 5 months to go. So.
Well, it was just an option on the list, and it was
Sure.
one of the potential things, and my thought, it would be the less expensive ones that were more for awareness than data collection, so that you don't have to worry about that
And that-
ongoing maintenance.
Yeah, next week when Pat Stevens is in here, we can bring it up again, because that would fall into the highway department purview.